You didn't lose your faith, you just entered a spiritual exodus.
There is a conversation that almost nobody is willing to have out loud. It happens in private, in the car alone after a church service that left you feeling nothing. In the middle of the night, when the prayers that used to come easily now feel like words spoken into an empty room. In the quiet moments when you look at the faith you grew up with, the certainty, the simplicity, the answers that once felt so complete, and you realize that something has shifted, something has changed, and you are not entirely sure when it happened or how to get back to where you were. And the word that rises up in those moments, the word that frightens you most, is this: am I losing my faith? I want to sit with you in that question today, not to dismiss it, not to give you a tidy answer that makes the discomfort go away, but to offer you a different framework for understanding what might actually be happening. Because what looks like the loss of faith from the inside is not always what it appears to be. And the spiritual crisis you are walking through right now might not be a departure from God. It might be the deepest movement toward Him you have ever made. It might be a spiritual exodus. Let me tell you what a spiritual exodus is not. It is not the comfortable, unexamined faith of Egypt. And I say that with great care, because Egypt faith is not nothing. It is where most of us begin. It is the faith of certainty, of clear answers, of a God who fits neatly into the categories we were given, of a spiritual life that functions according to rules we understand and can follow. Egypt faith is real. It sustains people. It carries people through seasons of life that would otherwise be impossible. And there is nothing wrong with beginning there. But Egypt faith was never designed to be the destination. It was designed to be the beginning of a journey. And the journey, the real, transforming, soul-forming journey, always involves a departure from what is familiar into something larger, something more honest, something that cannot be contained in the categories we started with. The Israelites' faith in Egypt was the faith of a people who had not yet encountered God in the wilderness. It was real, but it was also limited. It was shaped by 400 years of a particular environment, a particular understanding, a particular set of expectations about how life works and how God operates. And then came the Exodus, and everything they thought they knew was tested, expanded, sometimes broken, not because God had abandoned them, but because God was taking them somewhere their Egypt faith could not reach. Here is the question I want to ask you very directly. What if the faith you were losing was never the final form of your faith? What if the certainty that is crumbling was built on a foundation that was always too small for who you were becoming? What if the answers that no longer satisfy you stopped satisfying you because you have grown past them, not away from God, but closer to a God who is larger than the version you were introduced to? The deconstruction of faith, and I use that word carefully because it has become a loaded term, is not automatically a movement away from God. It can be if we let the questions lead us to cynicism and closure, but it can also be something else entirely. It can be the necessary dismantling of a smaller thing to make room for a larger one. In construction, before you can build something of real weight and permanence, you often have to tear down what was built poorly or built for a different purpose. The demolition looks like destruction from the outside. It sounds like destruction. It produces the dust and noise and disorientation of destruction, but it is not destruction. It is preparation. And God, throughout the entire history of Scripture, has never been afraid of demolition. Think about what happened to the Israelites' faith in the wilderness. They left Egypt with a particular understanding of God. Powerful, yes, but also distant. A God of their ancestors. A God of history. A God they had heard about, but not yet encountered personally and directly in the raw, unmediated way that the wilderness demands. The wilderness stripped everything away. The structure of Egypt, even the oppressive structure, had given them a framework, a routine, a set of expectations about how each day would go. In the wilderness, all of that was gone. There was no framework. There was no routine that held. There was only the daily question of whether God would provide, whether the cloud would move, whether the water would come from the rock again. And in that stripping away, in that terrifying, disorienting loss of the certainty they had depended on, something happened that Egypt never could have produced. They encountered God personally, directly, not through the stories of their ancestors or the religious structures of their captivity, but in the immediate, present, undeniable reality of daily dependence and daily provision. Their faith stopped being inherited and became their own. It stopped being about what they had been told and became about what they had experienced. It stopped being theology and became relationship. The wilderness did not destroy their faith. It deepened it past anything Egypt could have contained. I want to name something that the church does not always give us language for. There are seasons in the spiritual life where the faith that carried you to a certain point is no longer adequate for where God is taking you next. The container has to be broken and rebuilt larger. The understanding has to be dismantled and reconstructed on a deeper foundation. The God who fit neatly into your childhood categories has to be allowed to expand into something that your adult experience, your suffering, your questions, and your honest doubt have made room for. This process is painful. It is disorienting. It involves the loss of certainty that once felt like safety. And it often happens in the dark, in the places where the old answers stop working and the new understanding has not yet fully formed. But this process has a name in the spiritual tradition. It has been called the dark night of the soul. It has been called the second conversion. It has been called the wilderness. And in the language of this channel, we call it what it is: a spiritual exodus. How do you know if what you are experiencing is a spiritual exodus, rather than a genuine loss of faith? This is the question that matters most, and I want to answer it as honestly as I can. A spiritual exodus is characterized by hunger, not indifference. If you have lost interest in God entirely, if the questions no longer matter, if the search has ended in a comfortable cynicism, if you have simply moved on, that is something different. That deserves its own honest attention. But if you are still hungry, if the questions that are dismantling your old certainties are driven by a deep desire to find something more true, more real, more adequate to your actual experience of life, then the hunger itself is the evidence. You do not hunger for what you have lost faith in. You hunger for what you have not yet fully found. The Israelites in the wilderness complained. They doubted. They failed repeatedly and spectacularly. But they were still in the wilderness, still walking, still following the cloud, still receiving the manna, even when they resented it. Their faith was broken and imperfect and honest in ways that Egypt faith never was. And God walked with them through every moment of it. Your broken, questioning, uncertain faith, the faith that no longer fits the old containers and has not yet found new ones, is not less than what you had before. It is more. It is faith that has been honest enough to admit what it does not know, and that honesty is not the enemy of God. It is the beginning of a deeper encounter with Him. I want to say something to the part of you that is afraid, the part that wonders if the questioning will lead somewhere you cannot come back from, the part that has been taught that doubt is dangerous, that questions are the first step towards something dark, that the faith that is breaking apart because something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You are in the wilderness. The wilderness is supposed to feel like this. The disorientation is not a malfunction. It is a feature of the terrain. The loss of the old certainties is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that you have traveled far enough from Egypt that Egypt no longer looks like home. And here is what I want you to hold on to in the hardest moments of this spiritual exodus. The God who is large enough to hold your questions is larger than the God who required you to have none. The faith that survives the wilderness is stronger than the faith that never entered it. And the understanding of God that comes out the other side of this deconstruction will be yours in a way that Egypt faith never could be. Not inherited, not performed, not dependent on the absence of difficulty. It will be the faith of someone who walked through the wilderness and found that God was there. Not in the way they expected, not with the answers they demanded, but present, faithful, unrelenting in his commitment to bring you through. You did not lose your faith. You entered a spiritual exodus, and spiritual exodus is not the end of the journey. It is the moment the journey becomes real. The wilderness has an edge. The questions are not your enemies. They are the companions of a faith that is growing large enough to carry the rest of your life. And the God who called you out of Egypt is the same God who is walking with you now in the wilderness, in the dark, in the deconstruction, in the honest and difficult and necessary work of becoming. Keep walking. The faith on the other side of this wilderness will be worth everything the wilderness cost. Your spiritual exodus is not finished yet.